people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
The undisputed super featherweight champion of the world, Alicia, the Bumgarner.
That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. A bit of unexpected news per tweet from Michael Benson. A Natasha Jonas versus Mikaela Mayer rematch is reportedly being negotiated to potentially take place next for Jonas's IBF welterweight world title, according to Dan Raphael. A bit of news that I didn't expect. I didn't expect that Natasha Jonas would run it back with Mikaela Mayer. The only virtue I can see in a rematch, as opposed to waiting out the winner of Habazin versus Magyar for the WBC title, whatever champion emerges from that fight. The only virtue or virtues I can see in taking on Mikaela Mayer next for a second time, as opposed to waiting out the winner of that fight, is that to take on Mikaela, you don't have to wait because you're on the same schedule. It would allow Natasha Jonas to get out there that much sooner. There's that. There is also the profile of the match, name value, that Mikaela Mayer has more name value than either Ivana Habazin or Kinga Magyar, and that facing her for a second time might get more attention than facing either one of them, even though that would be a unification match with a champion. So I didn't expect that at this late stage in Natasha Jonas's career, she would decide to run it back with Mikaela, fight her for a second time, because I think she's very lucky to have walked away with the win.
Yes.
Very lucky to have walked away with her championship status intact.
Yes.
For me and my money, Mikaela should have got the decision. Mikaela won that fight. She did everything you need to do, short of a knockout, to win that fight. That's all she didn't do. Now what she has to do ahead of a rematch, ahead of a second fight, she has to stop Natasha Jonas this time, because she knows she can't get a fair shake. She knows she can't win on the cards. She did everything she was supposed to do the last time. If my memory serves me, Mikaela Mayer was the away fighter in that fight, and that's how she fought, taking it to the champion, being aggressive and backing her off, being busier round after round. She bullied Natasha Jonas, who had already spent a lot more time at the higher weights than Mikaela. Mikaela Mayer had really just gotten there, whereas Natasha Jonas, by that time, she had already been a champion at 154, moved down to 147. Mikaela was just moving up. But Mikaela seemed the physically stronger fighter of the two, oftentimes mixing it up with Natasha Jonas mid-range and backing her up, backing her off. All she didn't do was knock her down or knock her out, but this time she needs to, because she won that fight. She won it the last time. She can't leave it in the judge's hands this time, and you need to understand that I'm actually more of a Natasha Jonas fan than a Mikaela Mayer fan. I like the aesthetic of Natasha Jonas's matches more than Mikaela's. But fair is fair. Mikaela should have got that decision. The saving grace and the silver lining for Mikaela is that she's adaptable. She's not necessarily the fastest fighter or the strongest fighter, but she is adaptable, malleable enough to go back and look at that first fight. Look at what was working. Tweak a few things, change a few things, improve upon what you already did, because you're not in unfamiliar territory, and you know you can get the best of her. You've been here before. It's not an opportunity I expected Mikaela Mayer to get. Another crack at the apple and all the uncertainty she was facing, coming off what was her second professional loss. I don't know what the status of her relationship with Top Rank is. Not really. Near as I can tell, she's been fighting abroad. She's been fighting over there in the UK for at least the last 2 years. Last year and the year before. And you'd think that if Top Rank were really invested in Mikaela, they would have did what they had to do to bring Natasha Jonas here. Bring Natasha to America, where Mikaela would have had home field advantage. Every fight that she's had in the last 2 years has been on somebody else's dime. And to some degree I understood it, the amount of time that she was spending in the UK, because many of her rivals are from there. And it's a more vibrant and fertile market for a woman boxer, so to some degree I understood, but the Jonas fight... You say that a woman's boxing match is easier to sell in the UK than the US. That bit of it I do understand, but it's a double-edged sword because on the other side of that argument, would Top Rank outsource Shakur Stevenson? Willingly. Teofimo? I guess it just felt like after the Baumgartner fight, Top Rank could have done more for Michaela Mayer here on US soil, but she stayed out there, even after that fight.
And I know what the logic was.
But ask yourself, if those fights would have happened here in America, the Baumgartner fight, the Jonas fight, as part of a Top Rank show, do you think they would have went the way that they went?
Those decisions.
That Michaela Mayer went into the Baumgartner fight without a rematch clause in play, in case things go sideways.
They didn't protect her.
And that they shipped her off to Liverpool, to the UK, to get screwed on the cards. Hindsight being 2020, and reflecting on all of this and where we are now, you tell me if you get the sense that Top Rank did everything they could for this fighter. Did they?
Looking at where we are now, is that the impression you get?
I think it's very noble, honorable of Natasha Jonas to give Michaela another crack at the apple. Talk more about it once the fight is finalized.
Matter whether the corner or the fighter says he can't see, it doesn't matter. A cut is not life-threatening. You do not consider cuts life-threatening. You stop fights on cuts because of blood. And lastly, it comes down to that clown, crackerjack box having medical degree having doctor that they had in the corner and the commission that hired him. That was utterly ridiculous, dude. That was ridiculous.
Paulie Maligaggi, like many of you, is laying the blame at the feet of the ringside doctor in attendance for this past weekend's junior middleweight title fight between Tszyu and Sebastian Fundora, that in all of his medical expertise, he should have looked at that cut, made the evaluation himself that they would not be able to get it under control, that it would impair the fighter's vision, and just waved it off. Waved it off after round 2 or round 3.
I've seen fights stopped for less.
However, I have also seen fights where the cut was just as gruesome, just as bad, and those fights weren't stopped. See, what's consistent with the sport of boxing in all areas of its infrastructure, down to its people, boxing is consistently inconsistent.
The people are consistently inconsistent.
I could stand on my soapbox too and tell you that the fight should have been stopped, just like Paulie Maligaggi.
I agree with him.
Though having been a boxing fan for as long as I've been a boxing fan, I know that the sport is consistently inconsistent. Take the Tyson Fury fight or the Badu Jack fight, for example.
Those cuts were pretty bad.
The cut that Fury suffered at the hands of Otto Wallin and the gash on Badu Jack's forehead in the Marcus Brown fight. But those fights, they weren't stopped. In spite of the severity of the cut man's inability to get it in control, to control the bleeding and keep it out of the fighter's eyes.
Those contests were allowed to go on.
And yet, on a much smaller scale, a smaller stage, you look at a fight like Nazarena Romero versus Mayerlin Rivas, a fight that was stopped on cuts and subsequently ruled a no contest. Nazarena's cut looks like a scratch compared to what those guys had. So how does her fight get stopped, but theirs doesn't?
I don't know, maybe it's because it was a woman?
No, you can't say that. You can't say it's because she was a woman when look at the Erica Cruz versus Amanda Serrano fight. Erica was bleeding all over the place, but they didn't stop the fight. They didn't stop it on cuts.
It's not because she was a woman, it's because boxing is consistently inconsistent.
It's the only thing that's consistent with the sport. Left in the hands of the officials and those who are intended to be in charge and give the sport a sense of consistency and continuity, you get the opposite. You don't know what you're going to get.
Pretty much.
So do I agree with Paulie Maligaggi that the fight should have been stopped and it should have been stopped early? Ruled a no contest.
Yes.
That the ringside doctor and what's supposed to be all of his expertise, he should have been able to make that evaluation himself early on. Do I agree with him? Yeah.
But I'm not surprised that he didn't.
Because boxing is consistently inconsistent. Even my evaluation of the match and its outcome is somewhat inconsistent because I do feel that Sebastian Fundora did enough to win the fight, but it was only made possible because of the cut.
Does he deserve credit for fighting the right fight in those circumstances? Yes.
He fought the right fight in a situation where Tszyu got a huge gash over his head. There's blood leaking into his eye, so he can't time you with the right hand anymore. Sebastian keeping distance and using his jab, being prolific with it. He fought the right fight, and remember, he was favored to lose, but he won. So for that, he deserves credit.
Yeah.
It's not like he was trying to hit Tszyu with his elbow. Tim ran into him.
Sebastian deserves credit for the victory. He did enough.
He won. but I don't think he's actually a better fighter than Tszyu, and what I think is that the stars just aligned for him to win that fight. Under the right circumstances, kind of like the stars just aligned for George Kambosos to beat Teofimo. I don't actually think George is a better fighter than Teofimo, and if there were a rematch between them, I'd pick Teofimo to beat him. I'd pick Teofimo to knock him out.
You would?
Kind of like I'm picking Tszyu to beat Sebastian.
And knock him out.
If there is, in fact, a rematch between them in the near future, and Samson Lukowicz holds to his word that Tszyu's rematch is ready as soon as he is.
Think it'll happen?
I'm not so sure. Samson Lukowicz says one thing today and another thing tomorrow, and what we're essentially talking about is a gentleman's agreement. It's not actually on paper. Sebastian is not contractually bound to fighting Tszyu for a second time.
I don't think a verbal agreement is actionable.
Or actionable enough that it's a guarantee that we see a second fight between them. Would I like to see a rematch? Yes. Do I think Tszyu deserves one? Yes. I think that he should get the same opportunity from Sebastian that Sebastian got from him. But we know that boxing is less than ideal. In an ideal world, that's how it would go down. But things are seldom ever ideal in the world of boxing.
Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't.
Tim's got that gash on his head. He needs time for that to heal. In that time, we don't know if they don't put Sebastian in there with somebody else.
Over the summer months?
We don't know that Samson and the people at the PBC use the gash and the recovery time for that wound to close as an excuse to put Sebastian in there with Errol Spence Jr.
They might.
And what about the time that Sebastian needs to recover? What about the time that he needs to heal?
Yeah.
His mouth got all busted up, his nose.
They don't care about him. They just want to put Spence back on top.
What about the WBO title? Are they willing to put Sebastian in there with Errol Spence Jr. at the expense of the WBO title?
I think they are. They don't care about the WBO title. They still got the WBC right there.
So maybe what they do is a Spence versus Fundora fight and a Crawford versus Lubin fight. Lubin's one of their guys. He's right there at number 2 in the WBO's rank standings.
Who's number 1?
Josh Kelly. And I don't think for a second that Josh Kelly would take this as an opportunity to share the ring with Terrence Crawford. He, like everybody else, knows what would happen if he did. Ahead of the fight, I saw some of the stuff that Tszyu was saying, and I just knew this guy's approaching this whole PBC deal with wide eyes, and he needs to wise up. He said, Tszyu S.A. Tszyu envisions a stateside takeover, fights versus Canelo and Crawford and Spence and Charlo. I'm calling this Tszyu USA because this is the takeover.
Not anymore, it isn't.
I'm not mocking Tszyu. I'm still a fan of him, and I still have a lot of faith in this fighter. He wasn't outskilled this past Saturday. Those were extenuating circumstances. A gash opened up on his head. He couldn't see, thus he couldn't time Sebastian with the right hand anymore. He was too preoccupied wiping the blood out of his eyes, so he got outworked.
Got beat.
He lost.
It is what it is.
Cuts are going to happen. Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, especially when you're some away fighter, some guy from Australia dealing with the PBC. I remember last year there were talks about aligning Tszyu's next fight with some event that was supposed to be going down
In Las Vegas.
involving the Australian Rugby League, and how they were expecting a lot of Aussies to be in town. They wanted to hold Tszyu's next fight parallel to that event. Get all those Aussies to also go to Tim's fight.
And that didn't happen.
A byproduct of dealing with the PBC, I consider it a byproduct of dealing with the PBC because they were the ones who were supposed to provide him with an opponent. That opponent was supposed to be Erickson Lubin, but that didn't happen.
Fucking with them.
Ahead of this past weekend's fight, Tszyu said the 154-pound division is red hot right now. I don't know what Jermell Charlo is doing, but you have Errol Spence moving up. I would definitely love to fight with him one day. I can move up to 160, even 168. I'm not afraid. I'm a throwback fighter. I'll fight anyone. I don't give a shit. Put in both of the Charlo brothers, Jermell, Jamal, on the same night, and I will let them tag team each other, and I'll beat them both by myself. I think me and Terrence Crawford will definitely collide in the future for sure. 100%. I don't think Spence has been the same ever since his car crash. All praise to Terrence, of course, but it looked like Spence wasn't the same. He was off in every way possible. in my opinion.
Reading through these comments, you can almost hear the excitement from Tszyu, the hopefulness.
I would love to fight Canelo Alvarez, stated Tszyu. I have maybe a year and a half left at 154. I want to accomplish all of my goals and have as many big fights as I possibly can. And then we'll move on to 160 and 168.
Dealing with the PBC has derailed all of his momentum.
And that's all I see. The whole reason you jumped into bed with these people was to get a Charlo fight, and you never got it.
You can say this and you can say that, but it all means the same thing. Tim never got the Charlo fight he was after. He never got the fight for Undisputed.
They were supposed to provide him with an opponent for that big thing in Las Vegas involving the Australian Rugby League. That didn't happen. Didn't happen in time.
His fight date ended up getting pushed back.
And they still didn't get you Lubin. Technically, they didn't get you Keith Thurman either. He mysteriously gets injured 2 weeks out from the fight.
Right on time for them to swap him out for the exact opposite of what he is.
You were going to be facing a smaller, older, shorter fighter who moves around, moves away. Instead, you end up fighting a longer, taller fighter who comes towards you.
You were training for an orthodox fighter, you end up fighting a southpaw.
And these are all just coincidences, I'm sure. These are all just coincidences. I feel like Tszyu went into bed with the PBC with wide-eyed naivety and optimism, not realizing they'll backdoor him if they can. They backdoor their own fighters. Look at Rolly Romero. They talked him out of headlining a show with Ryan Garcia for what would have been a bigger fight than the one that he ended up having,
right,
to fight in a co-main event, an undercard.
For less money.
Just for him to get knocked out anyway. I think he would have lost to both of those fights. He would have lost to Ryan, lost to Cruz instead, but he would have made more money with Ryan.
They backdoor their own fighters.
The list goes on. How many PBC fighters have we talked about here on this channel who turned down more money for less money just to stay on the PBC side of things?
Say it a different way.
How many of their own fighters have they screwed over? How many?
And you think they wouldn't screw over Tszyu? You think they wouldn't backdoor him?
The smiling faces of both Errol Spence Jr. and Sebastian Fundora post-fight. It's almost like they knew.
Anything happens, anything goes sideways, Tim is out and Spence is in.
Oh, I know that the cut was accidental. That bit of it, that was the accident. But I also know that beforehand, Sampson assured Tim's handlers that there would be a rematch if Tszyu lost.
That's what Sampson told Tim's people.
Then what the hell is Errol Spence Jr. doing there?
What indeed?
Tim jumps into bed with the PBC, likely telling himself that he's going to be dealing with the biggest names in American boxing on American soil. Javante and Errol and Wilder and all these guys. He was likely very excited when he went into the deal.
Not seeing the forest through the trees.
I personally felt he should have jumped into bed with Top Rank because Top Rank airs their fights on the biggest sports network in the country. And them, unlike the PBC, they've dealt with Australian fighters and Australian promoters before. But he jumped into bed with the PBC, pursuing that Charlo fight that he never got.
Which I understood.
But I feel that as soon as they saw Jermell wasn't going to fight them, and he was going to fight Canelo instead, the relationship should have ended right then and there because you have your WBO title.
If it would have ended right then and there, we wouldn't be here now.
I still got faith in Tim and his boxing ability, but he needs to wise up. This is a dirty business.
It's every man for himself.